Yo, what is up guys, it Ghost here, welcome back to Stormgate Central. Happy Christmas to all who celebrate, and whether you do or you don't, I hope you guys had a nice holiday surrounded by your loved ones. So today we've got a very interesting interview to go over with Tim Morten, the CEO and production designer for Frostgiant Studios. This article was written by Sophie McCarthy over at esports.net, and if you guys want to read the entire thing for yourselves, then I'll leave you guys a link down below for your perusal. But I wanted to go over some of the more interesting questions here, and exactly what Mr. Morten has to say about those, because the answers are honestly pretty surprising. Guys, if you do enjoy the content here on the channel, please do consider hitting that subscribe button. There'll be much more to come here, going into the full release of Stormgate, from builds, guides, news coverage, casts, and more. Thank you guys so much for the support you guys have shown me so far. I really appreciate it, so cheers so much for that. So let's just jump in here with the first question. Can we expect a strong competitive esports experience for Stormgate, or will the focus be to develop the single player and the co-op game modes? As much as we can, we will be supporting RTS experiences for all kinds of players and their preferred activities. We think of these core experiences as the game's 4 pillars, or the 4 Cs: campaign, competitive, cooperative, and custom games. We aim to continue the RTS genre's storied legacy of world-class competition in Stormgate, which is part of what drove us to bring our closed beta to DreamHack Atlanta for our first ever live show match. Even at this early stage, we thought it was a good opportunity to show the world how competitive and fun Stormgate already is to play and watch. So we've heard Frostgiant say this before, and Tim is reiterating that here. No matter what kind of player you are, whether you like to dive into competitive 1v1 or you prefer playing casually with your friends, you should be able to find something to your liking here. Next question here: if the focus will be on the esports scene, what would be your ideal competitive format? For example, 1v1, 2v2, or even 1v1v1v1. Will there be any unique twists to this style? We're currently focusing on 2 competitive formats. Our primary competitive mode at this stage of development is 1v1, which we are offering without heroes. This was a decision that came about after many discussions with players and long-time leaders in the competitive RTS community. A hero-less format makes for an experience that centers on a player's ability to manage armies at the macro and micro level. I definitely agree with that, and whilst I know that there are a lot of Warcraft 3 fans out there, and this is probably a divisive topic, I think this was the primary factor that actually drove me personally away from Warcraft 3 and more towards Brood War and finally StarCraft 2 back in the day. However, for those of you who are fans of heroes, he goes on here: sometime after we release Stormgate to early access next summer, we'll begin testing a 3v3 team-based mode where each player will control a hero. Heroes in Stormgate contribute more than just a single powerful unit on the battlefield. Heroes create avenues for role differentiation and specialization. They will modify tech trees, for example, giving the player access to new units and alternate army compositions compared to the base faction. The vision is for 3 players on a team to be able to customize their heroes to create powerful team synergies. So if you've watched any of the co-op footage from the current beta build of Stormgate, right now you can choose 3 different factions. So you can choose the Vanguard or the Infernals, but then you can also choose this hero character's faction called Blockade, who's this like paladin-esque character with a hammer, and his faction is basically like a twist on the Vanguard. So for example, instead of building Exos, he can build, I believe they're called Riflemen or something similar, and they have slightly different abilities and traits to an Exo, and that goes right on throughout the tech tree. So he continues here: in typical team games, the outcome of the match boils down to whichever side ends up having a player eliminated first. Our 3v3 mode will likely not be a deathmatch style format. We plan to create a bespoke mode designed to keep all players involved and having fun throughout the match, perhaps using unique win conditions or objectives. It's still too early to go into great detail on 3v3 as we still have a lot of initial design left on this mode, but we feel it can become not just one of our most fun modes to play, but potentially a premier competitive mode that will be fun to watch at the highest levels of competition. So that is really interesting for anybody who's ever played 3v3 in StarCraft 2 or Big Game Hunters 3v3 back in the Brood War days. You basically gang up on one of your opponents with a super quick 3v1 rush, take them out, and then usually go on to win the game, right? You can come back from it, but it's incredibly difficult. So it does sound like they are addressing that here. We could see some very interesting team compositions with the heroes and the synergistic faction abilities, so who knows, perhaps it'll be some sort of RTS MOBA blend that could do really well. So next question here. We noticed similar design patterns to established legacy titles. Do you intend to introduce more races and factions to the final game? Yes, we will release Stormgate to early access with a third playable faction. After that, we will be releasing new campaign content in regular seasonal updates. Whether we limit ourselves to 3 or introduce a 4th playable faction in the future will have to remain a mystery for the time being. Okay, so we already have the Vanguard humans and the Infernal Demons. We knew that we were getting a third race that is yet to be unveiled, but I believe this is the first time I've heard Frostgiant mention anything about a 4th faction or race. Now, obviously, nothing has been promised here, but the way in which Tim answered this question, it kind of sounds like they have to have something planned, right? Otherwise, you're just leading people on. He could have simply said, we will release Stormgate early access with a third playable faction, and left it at that. But he didn't. He kind of intentionally dropped something for us there. So let's just speculate for a moment and let's assume, okay, that after release, somewhere down the long line of content releases for Stormgate, maybe a year after release, we get a 4th faction added to the game. I think that's super exciting, but also incredibly scary at the same time. If you go back to StarCraft 2's expansion releases that each gave the 3 races a few new units and abilities, that kind of thing completely shakes up the meta of the game. So imagine what happens when you introduce an entire new faction. That'll be pretty crazy, but I do think that changing that up in a big way can be really healthy too. It breathes life into the game again, and with Stormgate being free to play, people who have perhaps stopped playing will want to hop back on to check out that new faction. In any case, I'm sure that Frostgiant, if they are planning to do this, will have thought this through. So yeah, super exciting stuff there, but once again, this is just speculation. Okay, on to the next question. Once the game is fully released, will it be available for crossplay or on other platforms other than Steam? We aim to release Stormgate on other platforms in addition to Steam, and crossplay would be something we'd want to support to keep all of our players connected, but it's not something we can confirm at this time. Okay, so again, this comes as a big surprise. Now, I'm assuming by multiple platforms and crossplay, they are referring to consoles. They could simply be referring to the Epic Games Store as opposed to Steam. I guess you could call that a platform, although I think of it as more of another launcher, and that's about the only other place Stormgate could go on PC, I think. Ubisoft's launcher is reserved pretty much for Ubisoft games, the EA launcher is reserved for EA games, so assuming that they are talking about console, I remember playing the original Command & Conquer on my Nintendo 64 because I didn't own a good enough PC. The original StarCraft, that was also released on N64, Warcraft 2 was released on PlayStation 1, so this is not unheard of. Of course, I think we all kind of shudder to think about playing a competitive 1v1 RTS game with a controller, but let's not forget that consoles these days do support mouse and keyboard, so this could totally work. You could have crossplay and really open up Stormgate to a much larger player base than if it were PC only. That being said, if you own a mouse and a keyboard, you probably already own a PC, so why not just play it there instead of on console? Will there be a balancing or ELO MMR based system for competitive play? So yes, we will have an MMR based system that was worked on with the support of Flux and Toxie of Warcraft 3 Champions, the community-driven ladder and server infrastructure that really revived Warcraft 3 competition around the world. So these are the guys, I think, who basically brought back Warcraft 3 ladder that, if you recall, Blizzard completely destroyed for a time when they brought out Warcraft 3 Reforged. And it's honestly great to see Stormgate continuing that old Blizzard tradition from back in the day of recognizing talent within the community and then bringing them into the fold and giving them a job. I know that Ryan Shooter, the lead UI designer, for example, he originally started out making custom games for StarCraft 2 and mods and things like that, and, you know, they originally gave him a job. I think it's always a good idea to pull in people who obviously are passionate about the games and about the community. They're not just there for the money, and give those people the jobs, right? So that's always nice to see. We're not going to just connect players by region. Instead, we plan to create a truly global community of players matched against each other by skill level. It's important to us that Stormgate matches feel good for both players as often as possible. That's part of the reason why Stormgate will be free to play. A larger player base will make for a deeper player pool, which will result in better matchmaking. So for the first time here, you will actually be able to play with players from all different regions around the world, thanks to their rollback technology that smooths out the difference in latency to make it almost unnoticeable. Of course, if they end up putting the game on console and having crossplay, well, the player base will be even larger, which is always a good thing. Okay, next question here. What training or tutorial features will there be to encourage new players to join not just Stormgate, but the RTS genre? We are planning to provide new players with the opportunity to onboard into cooperative play with their more experienced friends via on-the-fly learning aids, and also to provide a standalone story-driven tutorial. In addition, we are looking at a number of different educational tools to help new players. One that we're particularly excited about is the development of different bot training partners that will be predisposed to playing in particular ways. One bot may be scripted to attack with a popular rush strategy, for example, so that players can train how to defend against it in safety without needing to figure out the counterplay against a live opponent. We've been inspired by the work that chess.com has done to make chess more approachable and welcoming to a new generation of players, so we're eager to explore similar training tools for Stormgate. This is something that we look forward to focusing on more after our initial early access launch. That's honestly a really cool idea. So let's say there's some early cheese rush or like a 2-base timing attack that you're having trouble defending against. You can get used to the stress of it, the fluster, and the frustration of the situation against a bot that will be able to execute this build flawlessly again and again, and hopefully by the time you come up against it against a real opponent who likely won't be able to execute it flawlessly, you'll be able to keep your cool. I'm also 100% certain that the talented modding and map building community will come up with some fantastic training modes of their own. So that brings us to the end of the interview, guys. I hope you enjoyed this little breakdown and dissection of those questions. If you missed this video the other day addressing some important criticisms of Stormgate by the community, feel free to give that one a look. Happy New Year, hope you have a good one, and I'll see you all in the next video.